संपूर्ण देशभर किनाऱ्यांच्या स्वच्छतेचं एक मोठं अभियान स्वच्छ सागर सुरक्षित सागर अशा नावाने 3 जुलै पासून सुरू झालेलं आहे. 17 सप्टेंबर पर्यंत 75 दिवस ते अभियान चालणार आहे. आणि या अभियानाचा भाग म्हणून जनजागृतीचे कार्यक्रमही वेगवेगळ्या ठिकाणी आयोजित करण्यात येत आहेत. आपण त्यातलं एक लेक्चर 23 ऑगस्टला आपल्या इथे झालं. डॉक्टर पुरुषोत्तम काळे आपल्या इथे आलेले. आज डॉक्टर संजय देशमुख इथे आलेले आहेत. आपण आपल्या विद्यापीठाचे कुलगुरू म्हणून त्यांना ओळखतो. डॉक्टर राजवाड्यांना मी विनंती करतो की त्यांनी डॉक्टर देशमुखांचा परिचय करून द्यावा आणि या कार्यक्रमाला सुरुवात करा.
Welcome everyone, and thank you Abhijit ji for introducing Professor Sanjay Deshmukh. Our students are here. I wanted to inform the speaker of the day, Professor Deshmukh, that the NCC NSS students and plus science students are here because we are celebrating this SSSS, that is Swaccha Sagar Surakshit Sagar Abhiyan of central government under the auspices of Vigyan Prasad. I wanted to inform Professor Deshmukh that our college, as students know already, is one of the nodal agency to publish Vigyan Vishwa, which is the periodical coming under what is called a scope activity of Vigyan Prasad. This is an activity to be held, to be conducted in the language, state language, that is Marathi. It's a monthly magazine whereby we kind of try to popularize the various recent topics in different faculties of science in that particular magazine. It's a 16-page color magazine. Right now we are in digital mode, and let's hope that very soon we'll go into print mode. And it is happening since last 7 to 8 months, and until this next March 23, we have been again allowed to do that by Vigyan Prasad. And my colleague is here with me, Mr. Abhijit Mole, is the executive editor of the same, along with one more scientist from Pune. And today, dear students, we have a very special guest amongst us. He has been former Vice Chancellor of University of Mumbai, and in Sartre College we always make, I should say, a habit of reading out the biodata of individuals, which we call here in full, almost in full. Full is really not possible because all these dignitaries really have a lot of work to be proud of. But a summary of the same we do read. The simple reason is that we keep having seminars, we keep having workshops for what is called as resume building. Okay, people tell you how your resume should be, how it should be written, what is the presentation, and what colors to use, what font to use. But the basic point in this whole thing is that you must have something to write in that resume. Okay, without that, the resume building is not possible. Otherwise, it will become an essay, it will become a story. But when you see people like Professor Deshmukh, you actually know what one can do in your lifetime. So that is why our policy, sir, is that we do read everything so that students know that this is the destination where you can get. This is the असं म्हणायचं झालं तर की हा टप्पा असू शकतो. For human achievement, actually there is no bar. But there are some people who keep raising this bar, and that is why we read it in full. So I am reading now. Professor Sanjay Deshmukh, MSc, PhD, DSc, LLB, DSc at different places. Professor of Life Sciences, University of Mumbai. Professor Deshmukh is one of the most accomplished, admired, insightful, and effective leaders in Indian higher education. He is widely respected in India and abroad for his enviable professional standing by bringing forth his notable achievements in the field of scientific research, academic leadership, as well as policy advocacy and development. The profile of Professor Sanjay Deshmukh it simply reminds us of his enviable professional standing by invoking his outstanding achievements. Professor Deshmukh has a field level research experience at national and international levels, spanning over 50 countries, including visits to over 60 international universities and organizations, and proven track record in resource mobilization, alliance building, and fundraising. These 3 points are very important, dear students. I repeat, resource mobilization, alliance building, and fundraising. Any activity now in the research field is never an activity of an individual anymore. It is a collective effort, so he is able to do that. Along with conservation planning, that generated over US $500 million for global conservation activities, the largest sum ever assigned to a single strategy. He is also known for bringing pioneering reforms in academic, financial, and administrative domains. As Vice Chancellor, I already told you, former Vice Chancellor of University of Mumbai, with fund generation of over 800 crore Indian rupees for execution of various development plans of the university. Because university of this size always has to undergo various master plans, so that's what is credited to him. He is the only faculty of University of Mumbai and probably in India with a unique distinction as a recognized PhD guide in 5 subjects. This I know, I have heard this many times from him. 5 subjects, which they are botany, life sciences, environmental sciences, biotechnology, as well as geography. Geography for the university abroad in USA, Ohio State University, Columbus. For field of research and academic collaboration, Professor Deshmukh has extensively traveled in over 50 countries and visited almost equal number of such international universities and organizations. Through extensive research collaboration, he has successfully endeavored to link ecological foundations of biology with agriculture, medicine, science, industry, and society. Through 34 research projects and several consultancies with cumulative grants close to $170 million, millions rupees, but could be dollars as well. Professor Deshmukh has supported over 20 doctoral and postdoctoral and full officer level researchers who have their credit with him over 200 research publications. Okay, so that's a massive number. During 2005 and 2010, Professor Deshmukh was president of an NGO, Konkan Nisarga Manch, which was recognized for taking technology and research from lab to land for enhancing rural livelihoods. So there are 2 awards: Best Village Development Award in NGO category, Minister of Environment and Forest, Government of Maharashtra, November 2010, and Best Village Industry Development Project Award 2009, Ministry of MSMI, Government of India, that's in 2009, August. Professor Deshmukh is an elected fellow. Of course, people of this character are required everywhere, this standing. That's why there is a lot of association. Professor Deshmukh is an elected fellow of several scientific bodies and academics such as Mangrove Society of India, and then National Environment Science Academy, International Society for Science and Technology, LEAD, Lead India, Leadership in Environment and Development, that is, and lastly, Fellow of Society of Biosciences. In recognition of his long and dedicated service to the cause of application of science and technology for securing sustainable livelihoods in general, and for his impeccable contributions in taking University of Mumbai to greater heights, he earned 2 honorary DSCs, that is, one in 2017, another one in 2020, by Ram Manohar Lohia Awadh University in Uttar Pradesh, and University of Science and Technology, Meghalaya, respectively. So, ladies and gentlemen, dear students, we have Professor Deshmukh amongst us, and I'm very fortunate to claim that we have been friends at some point of time. Of course, he is much ahead, and my privilege is here that I can call him to our college. Your privilege also in the equal measure. Now, I will not stand between you and him. I will request him to come to the podium straight away and start his exposition. And I'll seek your permission to sit over there. Okay? So that I hope these things are getting aligned properly. Welcome, sir.
नमस्कार. आजच्या या अतिशय महत्त्वाच्या कार्यक्रमाच्या अध्यक्षस्थानी असलेले माझे मित्र, ज्यांनी मगाशी उल्लेख केला की वी हॅव बीन फ्रेंड्स फॉर सम टाइम. फ्रेंड्स आर ऑलवेज फ्रेंड्स. आणि आम्ही एकेकाळी एकत्र शिकलो, त्याच्यामुळे त्याचा उल्लेख त्यांनी त्या पद्धतीने केला असेल असं मी म्हणतो की आम्ही इन्स्टिट्यूट ऑफ सायन्सचे विद्यार्थी होतो आणि एकाच वेळेला 2 वेगळ्या विषयांमधून आम्ही पदव्युत्तर शिक्षण घेतलं. तर असे आपले सर्वांचे लाडके आणि माझे मित्र माधव राजवाडे सर, माझे दुसरे मित्र ज्यांच्या लेखनाने आणि त्यांच्या आयुष्याकडे बघण्याच्या एका वेगळ्या दृष्टिकोनामुळे मी कायमच प्रभावित झालो आणि पत्रकारिता या विषयातला मापदंड ज्या काही तरुण आणि तडफदार लोकांनी घातला असेल, विशेषतः मराठी लेखनामध्ये, तर त्याच्यामध्ये मी अभिजित मुळेंचं नाव प्रामुख्याने घेईन. असे अभिजित मुळे आणि या मुंबई विद्यापीठाच्या अतिशय मोजक्या अत्युत्कृष्ट विद्यालयांपैकी, महाविद्यालयांपैकी एक असं साठे कॉलेज, ज्याच्या प्रांगणामध्ये मी फक्त एकदा आलो होतो आणि त्यानंतर आज योग आला. तर या सगळ्या कॉलेजचे आपण अतिशय भाग्यवान विद्यार्थी, तेवढेच भाग्यवान शिक्षक ज्यांना तुमच्यासारखे विद्यार्थी लाभतात दरवर्षी. महाविद्यालयामधले शिक्षकेतर सहकारी आणि या कार्यक्रमाचं संयोजन, आयोजन आणि प्रसारण करण्यासाठी राजवाडे सरांची जी टीम इथे उपस्थित आहे, मग ती मीडियाची असेल, मास मीडियाची असेल किंवा पत्रकारितेमधले सुद्धा काही लोक इथे असू शकतील, अशा या सर्वांना मी मनपूर्वक धन्यवाद देतो. विशेष करून राजवाडे सर आणि अभिजित, कारण त्यांनी या 12 व्याख्यानमालेतील एक पुष्प गुंफण्याची संधी मला आज दिली, त्याबद्दल मी खरोखरच खूप समाधानी आहे. आणि आपल्या पृथ्वीतलावरील जवळजवळ 71% भाग ज्या महासागराने आणि सागराने व्यापलेला आहे किंवा पाण्याने व्यापलेला आहे, तर अशा या भागामध्ये कशा पद्धतीने प्रदूषण, आणि प्रदूषण म्हणजे केवळ काहीतरी सोडलं गेले म्हणून होणारं प्रदूषण किंवा जे दृश्य स्वरूपात आहे तेवढंच म्हणजे प्रदूषण असं नव्हे, तर किती वेगवेगळ्या प्रकाराने आपण या महासागरांची किंवा जिथे जिथे पाणी आहे त्या सर्व क्षेत्रांची हानी करत आहोत. या विषयाबद्दल एक अतिशय महत्वाचा असा 12 व्याख्यानमालांचा संच आपल्या समोर विज्ञान भारती या प्रथितयश संस्थेने मांडण्याचा मी प्रयत्न केले असं म्हणणार नाही, पण सुरुवात केलेली आहे आणि हे दुसरं पुष्प आहे. मला अजून 10 व्याख्यानं ऐकायची आहे. तर या सगळ्या उपक्रमामध्ये माझा हातभार लागतोय याचा मला विशेष आनंद आहे. मुंबई विद्यापीठाची कुलगुरुपदाची जबाबदारी सांभाळल्यानंतर गेल्या 4-4.5 वर्षांमध्ये स्वतःचं रिसर्च, विद्यार्थ्यांचं शिकवणं आणि वैयक्तिक गोष्टी याच्या पलीकडे मी फारसा वेळ विद्यापीठाच्या बाहेर देऊ शकलो नव्हतो. आणि कारण मला असं वाटतं की एका मोठ्या जबाबदारीतनं जेव्हा तुम्ही पुन्हा दुसऱ्या एका जबाबदारीत येता तेव्हा ती जबाबदारी तेवढीच मोठी असते आणि वेळ तुम्ही जेव्हा त्याचं नियोजन करायचा प्रयत्न करता तर तुमच्याकडे भरपूर वेळ आहे असं तुम्हाला वाटायला लागतं, कारण तुम्ही एका वेगळ्या जबाबदारीतनं मुक्त झालेले असता. तर अशा वेळेला गेल्या 4 वर्षामध्ये खूप काही करू शकलो, परंतु महाविद्यालयांमध्ये जाणं, वेगवेगळ्या सभांना उपस्थित राहणं किंवा वेगवेगळ्या संशोधनात्मक कार्यामध्ये हातभार देणं हे मला फारसं काही करता आलं नाही. आणि त्यामुळे इनबिन 5 ते 6 महाविद्यालयांमध्येच मी गेल्या 5 वर्षात जाऊ शकलो. आणि त्यामुळे मला इथे आज येताना विशेष आनंद होतोय, तो अशासाठी की या महाविद्यालयाने अनेक प्रिन्सिपल्स पाहिले आणि त्यांच्यामध्ये माझ्याच वयाचा किंवा माझ्या बरोबर शिकलेला एक तडफदार विद्यार्थी जेव्हा ही जबाबदारी सांभाळतो आहे आणि समर्थपणे सांभाळतो, तर त्याचा मला विशेष आनंद होतो. आणि त्यांच्या प्रिन्सिपलशिपच्या या काळामध्ये मला इथे येण्याची संधी मिळाली, याबद्दल मी पुन्हा एकदा राजवाडे सर आपले आभार मानतो. आपल्यामध्ये मराठी, हिंदी आणि इंग्रजी या तिन्ही विषयांचं ज्ञान असलेले विद्यार्थी आहेत हे मला माहिती आहे. आणि मुंबईमध्ये सुदैवाने देवनागरी भाषा हिंदी आणि मराठी दोन्हीसाठी असल्यामुळे हिंदी भाषिकांना मराठी समजणं काही फार कठीण आहे असं मला वाटत नाही. आणि तसंच मराठी मुलांना इंग्रजी आणि हिंदी, तसंच हिंदी विद्यार्थ्यांना. त्यामुळे माझ्या ज्या स्लाइड्स मी तयार केल्यात त्या इंग्रजीमधून आहेत. मी काही त्यातला भाग इंग्रजीतूनच आपल्याला सांगेन, परंतु मराठी आणि हिंदी सुद्धा काही गोष्टी सांगण्याचा प्रयत्न करेन. तर सर, आपल्या परवानगीने मी या माझ्या दुसऱ्या व्याख्यानमालेच्या पुष्पाला सुरुवात करतो, ज्याच्यामध्ये पोल्युशन्स ऑफ द सीज थ्रू बायो इन्व्हेजन, कॉजेस अँड रेमेडीज असा मी विषय घेतलेला आहे. आपल्या परवानगीने मी इंग्रजीतून सुरुवात करेन आणि मधून मधून मराठी आणि हिंदीतून बोलतो. So dear students, it has been a privilege to be with you this morning, and I feel more privileged to be here in the form of a speaker to contribute to the 12 lecture series initiated by Vigyan Bharati, and one of its general secretaries, Shri Jayantrao Sahasrabudhe, is currently hospitalized because he met with an accident only a couple of days ago. So we all on this occasion would like to pray for him and for his speedy recovery. He has been a doyen of thought process which has taken Vigyan Bharati at a different level, and many of his ideas and vision has culminated into many programs. They have been of not only national importance but global importance also, and therefore his continuing to be with us is of utmost important, because he is a national wealth, not just an individual from India, and therefore we would like to pray for his speedy recovery. Dear friends, the oceans that I mentioned about occupy about 71% of water bodies or water on the total geographical area of our planet. Out of this 71%, 97.5% is saline water. So technically it is not possible for us to consume it as it is. And also for the plant kingdom or the forests or the plant life, it is called as a physiologically dead zone. Remaining 2.5%, if you consider as 100% of fresh water supply, then out of that only 97.5% are in the form of glaciers and permafrost, which means they are not directly consumable. You have to make them to a drinkable form, and remaining 2.5% of that 100% of fresh water that is available, we are able to utilize that. As against this particular number or statistics, we should also try to understand the existence of human race, that is all of us. And if you look at the total number of biological species which have been discovered, of course by humans, and they are to the tune of 17.5 lakhs or 1.7 million species. And out of those species of plants, animals, birds, microorganisms, we are only one species. Now the evolution of man has been at the fag end of our evolutionary process, and despite that we have grown to such an extent in terms of numbers that it is now a very alarming situation, not only for our own existence but the impact that we are putting on the other natural resources and the species which are surviving on this planet. Humans have not explored the entire world to document all the species that are existing, and therefore it is always said that this 17.5 lakh species that we have named or discovered, there are at least 100 times the number which is not yet been discovered. And therefore, if you are able to explore the world, and while doing that go for inhabitation and destroying the habitats, then we do not know how many species every day we have been destroying. The extinction process, which was at a steady pace based on the rules of evolution, has enhanced suddenly in the last 2 centuries. And it is said that every decade we are losing more than 1,000 species of our documented biodiversity or biological resources. And therefore, if you want to look at places for habitation for human survival and its welfare, we have to look at only the coastal areas, because the coastal areas are the ones where most of the major rivers, they flow from the landward side and meet the sea. And the enrichment of these coastal areas where agriculture can be practiced is the only source of multiplying the domesticated wild species of crops which humans discovered in the form of agriculture 10,000 years before today. And they started inhabiting certain areas for planting those wild varieties of crops and reaping harvest out of that. And that is how the number of humans kept on increasing. From the day when we first evolved as Homo sapiens, till the year 1897, we had reached only first billionth mark. And after that, in less than 127 years, we have reached the 7th billion mark. And every 10 years, we are adding 1 billion to our population. So this particular enhancement of population and the speed at which we are increasing, it is very much alarming, because the regions where the cultivable lands are there and the humans can depend on the natural resources in addition to agriculture are largely concentrated in the coastal areas. About 63% of the world's population is residing in 60 kilometers of the region from the coastal areas. If you draw an imaginary line on the map of the world, then that is a 60 kilometer range of land where 63% of the people are residing. In India, you are well versed in the map of our own country. 80 kilometers from the coastal areas, we have 34% of our population. And therefore, it is not surprising that the mega cities like Mumbai, Chennai and Kolkata, out of 4, that is Delhi, are in the coastal areas, because these are the areas where you have a lot of opportunities, not only for survival, but for your enhancement of your abilities, and also dependence on the natural resources. Now, looking at the concentration of population, not only in our country, but also throughout the world, it is imperative that we have to look for creating more and more opportunities, growing more and more food for our very survival. And for that, industrialization that has taken place over the last 2.5 centuries, the credit goes to that. Initially, the industrialization, the frequency at which the industrial revolution used to take place, first it was about 150 to 200 years. Later on, it got reduced to about 75 years. And now every 10th year, we have a different revolution in industrial context. And therefore, the development of science and technology, which is the most important development that has taken place, particularly in the 21st century, where we can aim at reaching anything that we can aim for. And as Principal Rajwade sir mentioned, there is no limit to human creativity and thought process. Everything can be achieved. So in that context, when we are looking at the oceans, how do we look at the indirect impact on oceans of the human activities, which till the last decade of 20th century was not even known to the human beings, because it was a kind of unknown activity which was happening, and we were not in even position to understand that yes, this is a kind of pollution also can cause a lot of harm for our own survival. And therefore, I have chosen a topic which talks about this invasion, that is invasion of biological species. In addition to the known aspects of pollution that all of us are aware, I will touch upon those aspects in the form of some of the bullet points and pictorial records of what is the impact of these types of pollutions. And then I will go to the level of what we call it as biological invasion. And that is where you will be astonished to know that yes, this is something which we had not heard probably till date, and how it can create a larger impact, of course a negative impact, on the very survival of the wealth of ocean, the biological wealth of oceans, and ultimately the survival of our own race. So with this, I would like to request to go for the next slide, and that particular slide is we're talking about the definition of pollution, and I don't have to read while I am talking. You can always look at the screen and read that particular definition. But we have different categories of pollution, and the World Health Organization, as it has defined pollution, ultimately whatever activity or anthropogenic activity that we are all conducting, if it is directly harmful to the health of human beings, that is what is one of the parameters. That activity which is polluting the environment and can cause health hazards is directly relevant to form a definition of pollution. So we are talking about sources of pollution when we talk about the pollution of the oceans or seas. So there are different sources that we can talk about: land-based resources, agricultural runoff. As I said, in most of the coastal regions of the world, the human habitation has led to generating produce in the form of agricultural crops in these regions, and the agricultural runoff is also one of the concerns that is contributing to the pollution. Municipal and industrial waste, that is obvious that we do not have to explain, but for an island city like Mumbai, with a geographical area of hardly 604 square kilometer, of which 104 square kilometer is Sanjay Gandhi National Park, and in 500 square kilometers we have 2.5 crore people staying. Now this population is little more than the population of entire continent of Australia. Can you imagine how much pressure on the land resources of Mumbai we have by this burgeoning population, more than 50,000 people per square kilometer. If you have any rally or a meeting at Shivaji Park, one of the largest grounds that we have in Mumbai, then about 100,000 people can stand and less than 50,000 can sit if you want to organize them on chairs. That is the kind of population density that the city of Mumbai has. In Dharavi, the question is beyond imagination. But what I am trying to highlight here is that the municipal and solid waste that we are generating for the city of Mumbai, even today, more than 40% of the sewage of the city of Mumbai goes to the nearby seas untreated. About 57% of our untreated sewage is released in Thane Creek for the population of Thane. And population of Thane district now, of course, it has been divided, but the Lok Sabha constituency of Thane has about 30 lakh people before it was reorganized based on the population. So 57% of the sewage is untreated. So you can imagine the kind of impact it can have. Even getting into the water of Thane Creek or in the nearby regions of Mumbai island is very risky, that we don't realize. Even though the water looks clean, it has got a lot of problems within. The sea-based resources, oceanic dumping, offshore oil spills, can I have the next slide, are also some of the categories of marine pollution. Broadly, if you want to divide the types of marine pollution based on the sources, then they can be categorized as oil in the form of petroleum hydrocarbons, eutrophication, then you have conservative sources like metals and halogenated hydrocarbons, thermal pollution, radiation, and litter and plastic debris are some of the other categories. So in these categories, if you want to look at the sources of the pollution and their impact, I would like to briefly touch upon these aspects because our main theme is biological invasion. So I'll spend little time on this for your reference. And the first point is oil pollution, and it is basically the oil spills that we come across when we read the newspapers or watch the news on television. We feel that these are the sources where the oil spill can take place accidentally and it can cause a lot of harm to the water bodies or the oceans or the seas in which the oil spill takes place. The reason behind that is that 90% of the oil is transported by the waterways. They are not transported by pipelines. Between the continents, they are transported by waterways, and barring a few continental connections, it is the ships which carry the oils, and therefore there is every chance that some malfunctioning or some technical glitch can cause oil spill in any part of the country anytime. And therefore the categories like crude oil from the tankers, drilling rigs and wells, and spills of refined petroleum are all types of oil spills or the material that is released accidentally or by human activities. And you can see on the left hand side top picture the kind of oil spill is causing the soil on the coastal areas getting mixed with the oil, and you cannot really allow that soil to remain there because the mudflats themselves are a separate ecosystem and it is full of biological resources, a diversity of both plants and animals. And it's a source of survival for large number of birds which flock into these areas for their feeding and roosting activities. But these birds which are probably staying in the water bodies, they are directly affected by the oil spill, and you can see the kind of oil layer it is there on the bodies of these birds, and they cannot survive beyond a particular point. The second point is eutrophication, and when there is enrichment of water by nutrients, then the phenomenon is called eutrophication, and a thin layer of large diversity of floating hydrophytes or microalgae, they are formed because of the eutrophication. And there are indications of eutrophication. Some of the species like Eichhornia, the visible form of plants, which form a kind of mat like makhmal, we call it in Marathi. There is a lake in Thane which used to get a lot of untreated sewage in that particular lake. And because of the eutrophication, this particular species called water hyacinth, it used to appear automatically because of the higher number of nutrients. And it would give you an impression as a makhmal, what we call it in Marathi, because of its beautiful purple flowers and a complete bulbous nature of the plant and the leaves. So it will look as if there is a makhmal spread on the surface of the water, and you will not be able to see the water body at all. So that particular lake still is called as the Makhmali Talab in Thane, if some of you are staying in Thane. So these are some of the direct impacts of eutrophication, and the next slide I have tried to show that the layers of green color or patches which are seen on the water surface, which hampers the process of respiration of the fish which are residing in the underneath of that particular water or the thin film, and they are not in a position to survive beyond a particular limit if the respiratory system is affected directly by the eutrophication. The third is conservative pollutants, that is metals, and they are of two types, natural resources and man-made resources, where the erosion of ore in the natural form bearing rocks, atmospheric inputs, that is causing wind-blown dust, and the volcanic activity are basically the natural source for this type of pollution. And the man-made source is industrial discharge and also sewage discharge, due to which this type of pollution is observed in the marine environment. You have a story of early 50s in Japan. There is a bay called Minamata Bay. And on that particular way, it was full of tourism activities and people used to flock there over weekends. And the fish from that coast was considered as one of the most delicious fish that one could think of. But the people who started getting some symptoms visibly on their bodies in the form of white patches, and the next generation progeny of these people started getting some genetic deformity in the visible format, as you can see in this particular photograph. Then the government got alert and they realized that the heavy content of mercury that was released by way of pollutants in the nearby nearshore waters of this Minamata Bay was directly causing the contamination of not only the water, but the fish residing in that area. They were contaminated because they used to consume that mercury. And by consuming the fish, people started getting these deformities. They became genetic deformities later on. And therefore, this particular process of 7 years was actually observed much later, and generations of people got genetically affected. So these are some of the consequences which we do not know what happened at that particular time. So in addition to these, there are three more types of marine pollutions that I want to highlight. Conservative pollutants, halogenated hydrocarbons. And the source of that is aerial transport, that is aerial spraying of pesticides can contribute to aerosols traveling far away distances, and they can cause a lot of pollution on the surface of the soil particularly. Then we have freshwater inputs where rain washing of pesticides carried into the seas by rivers also can cause the silt within the flowing river water can get contaminated. And then the direct inputs in the form of industrial outfalls, particularly the pesticide manufacturing companies. We have had instances of this type of pollution in the nearshore areas of Alibag, particularly in Raigad, and down south near Goa, Zuari estuary, where we have some of the largest fertilizer making plants, and also in Gujarat. So these are some of the direct impacts of fertilizer spillovers into the water nearby. The impact of that is low solubility in water, persists for a long duration, fat soluble. They are therefore incorporated into the tissues of marine organisms. And finally, possibility of transmission through food webs, about which I just mentioned by giving the example of Minamata Beach. The thermal pollutants are also very common, and the outfall from Karaya power plant in Saudi Arabia, the photograph that I have downloaded from some of the referred material, and you can see the water quality can degrade immediately because the ambient water temperature in that region when the thermal waste is released, it rises up to 70, 80, 90, even 200 degrees Celsius. And the biological resources residing in that nearby environment of water, they get directly affected. They are killed and sometimes they migrate from that region. The fifth is radioactive pollutants. Weapon testing, liquid waste and solid waste are forms of radioactive pollution, and the bioaccumulation as it happened in the fish, particularly at Minamata. There are many other organisms which are consumed like algae, and the accumulation of these pollutants within these edible forms of plants or animals or fish, they are directly harmful to the human health. The radioactive pollution, the atom bomb that you have heard of, particularly in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, these are some of the radioactive pollutants which are directly harmful to the human survival. After giving you this particular introduction, I want to switch over to the main theme of this particular lecture, that is bioinvasion. Dear friends, as I said, the larger amount of trafficking of the commodities throughout the world happens through waterways. And whatever nations we have on the coast of the oceans or seas, or even the backwater areas, these are the repositories of majority of commodities, and the waterways that are there, they are used for transportation of these commodities. I'll give you only one example of Jawaharlal Nehru Port, which is located in Mumbai in addition to the Mumbai Port Trust. Within these two ports, the ships which bring commodities are to the tune of about 9,000 ships per year. You can imagine the amount of traffic of large ships that takes place. And these large ships are not what we can imagine. They are 100, 200 meters long. And their carrying capacity is like 5 lakh tons, 10 lakh tons. They can be containers which are actually on the ships, which you can see if you are going to Elephanta or for that matter to Mandwa while you go to Alibag. And you will come across some of these huge ships which are entering the port of Mumbai, and they are parked outside somewhere to get a signal for them to go and discharge their commodities and fill in the new commodities and go out. So there are more than 140 countries around the coast of various continents. And for example, in India we have 10 major ports, 12 major ports. So how much traffic of ships is taking place every year, you can only visualize. And the kind of ships which are carrying these commodities. So what happens is that these commodities which are carried, and there is a ship, you have seen the ships most of the times, there is a dividing line of color, either red color at the bottom and then a totally different color like black at the upper part of the ship. Now there is certain part of the ship is always submerged. That is how the ship balances itself. And this particular level of water, when you are filling some commodities to the tune of 5 lakh tons, 1 ton is 1000 kilograms into 5 lakh. You can imagine the kind of weight that ship is carrying. And it is moving at a speed of say 12 miles, nautical miles per hour or so. So that particular line which you can see, that line is always there at the joining point of water to the ship. And the commodities which are there at that particular time, the ship is floating, it is submerged partially. When it goes to the port of call and removes all those commodities, naturally when we are removing 5 lakh tons of weight from the ship is definitely going to come up because the weight is being removed and it can topple if you don't balance the weight of the ship because you are removing entire weight. So for balancing the ship, in the bottom of the ship, there is a chain of empty tanks which are connected with huge pipes. So they are interconnected on the peripheral region in the bottom of the ship. These huge tanks are there and they are filled with water from the sea. So when your commodities are there on the ship, these tanks are having relatively less water because it is only balancing the weight of the ship. But when the entire weight of commodities is removed, say 5 lakh tons, then these tanks have to be full or they have to balance the weight, otherwise the ship will not float, it will topple. So the water which is filled, which is from the sea, from the same port where the ship is parked, that water is to the tune of about 2 lakh ton liters of water. You can imagine the magnitude of that water. Now the ship is sailing probably empty after releasing those commodities, going to the next port of call from where again the commodities are going to be filled in. Then while filling the commodities, the water which was filled up in the port of Mumbai, for example, and the ship has gone to Iran, and now it is carrying oil. Okay, it's an oil tanker. So while filling the oil on the tanker, the water which was collected from Mumbai port for balancing the ship is released proportionately so that while filling the commodity, the ship will not sink. You are releasing the water from the tanks. So that water which is used for balancing is called ballast water. It is called ballast water. In Marathi it is called Nirima Jal. Now that particular water at any given point of time has got larvae and eggs of smaller organisms at the initial stage of their reproductive phase. And those are taken into the ship in those tanks at the time of balancing the ship. So you are taking the water without any treatment to balance the ship, taking that water to a different country and releasing that water into the new environment while filling the commodities on the ship. So there was no rule and regulation about taking in water and releasing without even testing what kind of organisms are there in that water. So at any given point of time, there are at least 4,000 different species which are in the form of eggs or larvae, which get into those tanks of the ship and they are released into the new environment. So while they are sailing from one port to other, out of those 4,000 different species, maybe 90% of them, they don't live because there is no light, there is no other source of respiration. So the species, the larval stages of these 4,000 organisms, 90% of them may not survive. So hardly 400 species are actually going to be released into the new environment. Out of those 400 species, maybe 40% are actually going to survive when they are released into the new environment. And they will start multiplying. And out of that, hardly 4% will get a better environment than what they had in the previous stages. And they will proliferate. So for example, there are certain disease creating bacteria or viruses which are transported through this water and are released into the new port of call. And 2 or 3 of those varieties get favorable environment and proliferate. Then they can cause havoc into the new country where they are released. And the people who die because of these diseases which are introduced through this ballast water, every year throughout the world is to the tune of about 5 lakh people every year because of these diseases which are transmitted. Even the larval stages of barnacles, the barnacles, the crustaceans which are seen attached to the bottom of the ships or the hulls of the ships. And those organisms are actually in the larval stages when they are in the early stages of their growth. So they are also transported through the ballast water, they go to the new port of call. Similarly, there was an example, the Black Sea. There are countries surrounding the Black Sea and they do a lot of fishing, even the Scandinavian nations. And at one point of time, they used to have a huge collection of fish and commercial fishing was going on. Within 2 years, that commercial fishing was reduced to 20%. 80% production was not there of a particular fish. And they were not in a position to make out what was the problem because they were following all the biological norms of not fishing at the time of spawning period of the fish and so on. But what was the reason? And they realized that there was a huge ingress or invasion of a particular species of jellyfish which had its food in these particular fish species particularly, which were highly commercially important. And because of the and then they realized that at one point of time, a particular ship carried the larvae of this jellyfish. And then the jellyfish was introduced in the entire Black Sea region. And it proliferated so much, its density enhanced so much that they started eating away the fish which were commercially exploited for making their economy viable. And that is how the impact of ballast water was known to the world in mid-80s, early 90s. And you can imagine, we are having 5,000 ships entering Mumbai port for JNPT, another 3,000 for BPT, Mumbai Port Trust. You can imagine every ship is carrying 4,000 different organisms and getting released into the new port of call. That was the time when the International Maritime Organization got alert and they started looking at this ballast water management program. We were very fortunate to start this program as one of the only 6 nations in the world where this project was sanctioned and approved. And the Government of India through the Ministry of Shipping executed this program with only 3 agencies which were contributing. One was the National Institute of Oceanography, the Fisheries Survey of India, and the third was Rambhau Margi Prabodhini of Thane in Bhayandar. If you have gone there, you can see that. So these 3 organizations were responsible from India, and there are only 6 nations which contributing to understanding the problems of ballast water and the bioinvasion that takes place because of the ballast water transport. This particular bioinvasion was a very new phenomena. People were not aware about it. And a lot of research went on thereafter. And in last 20 years, we have been able to come out with certain strategies with respect to designing of the ships, which can be preventing the intake of ballast water at a particular level. But that is not possible because the designs of the ships cannot be altered in 10 years, 20 years like that. It may take about 6 to 7 decades to come out with a direct strategy of not allowing the organisms to enter the tanks of these ships. Australia at that particular time was way ahead because they had records of intake of water, the ships which were coming to their port, and they had 100 years of record. So because of that, in early 80s when this, or late 80s when this problem started surfacing, people started knowing about it. Australia was the only country which was able to immediately implement the strategies for management of this ballast water. And after that, for several years, they started sending their own ship in the mid-sea, and the ship which is coming from abroad, they would stop there, they will transport the commodities on Australian ships, and the Australian ship will come to their own port. So that the chances of ballast water getting released in the new port of call in Australia were nullified. In this way, they were able to immediately take measures. But economically, poor countries cannot have this kind of strategy. They cannot afford to send their own ship to get the commodities. They would rather wait for the ship to come to their port. So these are some of the areas which were very grey areas in terms of research and development. And therefore, from this particular point of view, I thought I should make you aware about certain nomenclatures, and I have just mentioned here alien species. I have just mentioned to you how these 4,000 different species are introduced to the new port of call, to the new waters of the coastal regions of a particular country. They are all alien, they are not resident of that particular nation. And that is how this particular word, alien species, is introduced. Litter and plastic pollution, this was the 6th point which was from the previous aspect of marine pollution, which I did not show you. But this particular plastic pollution also can create havoc, as you can see in the next photograph, where the turtles or many other organisms, they get entangled with the plastic, maybe plastic bags or plastic paper and so on. And in the coastal areas, you can see the huge plastic dumps and the plastic which is also flown through the waves and currents. So these are some of the major problems. The nomenclature that I am trying to make you aware is as follows in next few slides. We will see the themes on which the bioinvasion is related to. The biosecurity, basically the organisms which are biological organisms, and they are causing pollution of the seas, which is directly harmful to the human health and the economy of particular nations. The biological warfare that we are talking about, which was tried in the Second World War, and they were only experimenting. But this particular unknown danger that the humankind has because of the ballast water transportation of many diseases and many viruses and bacteria, this was not known in the form of organized crime that nations otherwise would have opted for in war periods. And therefore, the biosecurity is a term that was coined to prevent the pollution of the marine nature, which is caused by the ballast water or the bioinvasion, the species which are biological and they invade the new environment. The eradication, the extirpation of entire population of a species within a management unit is called eradication. And then they can be declared eradicated if you are in a position to have an intervention of management and get rid of those particular species which are introduced in the new environment. The impact, of course, all of us know the word impact, and also another new word, invasive or invasion ecology, the invasion that takes place of the biological organisms. How you are in a position to overcome that invasion, and how do you track it at a different level. So the ecology of the invasion also needs to be studied, which was not a successional process like principles of ecology, but they have to be location specific, the source specific, as well as the spread specific. In the new environment, what kind of biological organisms will survive will be decided at that particular point in time, because the dynamic environment of water cannot be static as such, and therefore for every such invasion of biological organism, one has to look at their ecological aspects. Then invasional meltdown, that was a term that was coined by Simberloff and Von Hole to describe interactions among invaders that accelerate invasions and amplify their effects on native communities. Invasive species I have just mentioned, native species, that is the taxa that have evolved in a given area without human intervention. They are called native species. In India, in the pre-Green Revolution times, we used to have 55,000 different varieties of rice alone. They were called land races. And they were conducive to the microclimatic variations that used to take place, the change in the temperature, change in the humidity, change in the microclimate, like if it is a coastal area, then wave action, the currents and so on. How these crops which were of native nature, they used to adjust to the dynamic changing environment. So these native species of 55,000 rice varieties, they were protected by way of developing gene banks both at field and the XC2 levels. And that is how the Green Revolution, though it was like a very drastic change in the plantation drive or the cropping patterns that were followed before that, it enhanced the ability of our nation to grow sufficient food to protect our humans from getting migrated or famine-like situations that would be created because of the non-availability of sufficient food grains. So these native species are very important, and they are also relevant with respect to the bioinvasion, because the native species of that particular region, they enrich that environment, and when there is an invasion of a different species by way of what we call it as ballast water, then it can really be very harmful, because the native species are likely to be completely wiped out because of this invasion. Risk assessment is the one which we are all aware about, because the risk assessment for any developmental project is carried out. A similar way of approach can also be done with respect to the bioinvasion of species. The process of biological invasion that you can see here, which I have already explained to you, but the introduction of a species in a new environment, its establishment, and then its invasion, that is the spread over different surrounding area, is called invasion. The next slide is talking about the biofouling formation, the barnacles that I am going to show you in the next slide. How these barnacles are carried from the water bodies or the water which is from the ballast water source, and they are in the form of larvae. So when they are released in the new environment, they get attached to the substratum or the surface where they can be favorably growing. And then they start growing, and then they develop those calcium substances, and the larval stage can get converted into a barnacle that you must have seen along the shores of Mumbai on the rocks if you have gone to Worli Sea Face or Haji Ali or even the Gateway of India. Before you board the launches, you can see on the launch, the sides of the launches on the surfaces that are submerged in water. These barnacles are most of the time seen. They are very, very harmful, and they are invasive. They can block even the hulls and the fans of the boats, and huge loss of economy can take place because of these barnacles. And they are not seen till the time they start growing, because at larval stage you cannot make out where they are getting attached and so on. So the ship energy efficiency management, which started just about 25 years before today, that then brought into the picture the various approaches, not only from the scientific and research point of view, but approaches for designing the different types of ships, which will have some contribution to minimizing the impact of biological invasion. And it is called as Ship Energy Efficiency Management Plan. These plans in the form of planning, implementation, monitoring, self-evaluation and improvement was defined, and it is shown in this particular slide. I will be leaving the presentation with the college so that any of you would like to refer to it at a later stage. Of course, the video recording will give you an equally good idea about the presentation. But these slides, that's why I'm not reading the slides, I'm just trying to explain the gist of what is there in this particular slide. The future issues of biological invasion, I am coming to that particular theme now, and what will be the future issues? The examples of various types of impacts of invasive alien species on human health and social activities are highlighted in 8 points, which are given in this particular slide. And they are basically based on taxonomic groups as well as environment, such as plants, saltwater invertebrates, freshwater animals, terrestrial invertebrates and vertebrates. So they are categorized into 8. First 6 are human health related, and next two, the last two are social activities related. So they are cause or vector of human diseases, host of parasites, of pets and livestock, causes injuries, causes allergies, accumulation of toxins and their transfer to human food. These are all impacts of the invasion that takes place biologically. Hazard to health by contamination of soil and water, impedes recreational activities and tourism, that is the social impact, and also another social impact is aesthetic impact, deterioration of the quality of environment. The summary points that I would like to just brush up what I have spoken so far, and probably it will be useful if I read them out for you, so that they will probably the takeaway points for you when you go back. The invasive species are increasing in number, extent and influence worldwide as a result of increasing globalization. Harmful ecological effects of biological invasions are recognized in many parts of the world. Invasive species cause rapid and dramatic ecosystem degradation, loss of biodiversity and homogenization of regional biotas, that is the biological resources, and the impact on ecosystem services and on human health and well-being. The translation of ecological effects of biological invasions into monetary terms is still in its infancy, but the limited data available point to invasive species, incurring huge economic costs in many sectors. The economy of the world is very funny. You have the tropical belt of the world, 25 degrees north and south, where you have the biologically richest regions of the world. 77% of the world's biological diversity is in this particular region of tropical belt. But the same belt has got the countries which are called developing nations. Because they are all economically poor, but biologically extremely rich. And the nations beyond and below this 25 degrees north and south latitude are called developed nations. So such a drastic contrast that you can see in the distribution of biological resources. And same thing happens here. The biological invasion can cause havoc, and most of the nations which are affected are the developing nations again, because for want of commodities, for want of imports, they have to have this transportation mechanism where the transportation is largely by the waterways. And the chances of bioinvasion in the regions where you have biodiversity rich areas but economically poor nations, these are largely affected. So the drastic contrast that you can see in the economy of the world and the GDP, what we call it, the gross development product, which decides the economy parameter of a particular nation. The ecological consequences of bioinvasion is also improving in terms of understanding of the consequences. There is a lot of research going on in most of the nations, not necessarily the coastal regions, but the inland areas where, based on the modern technologies of GIS and remote sensing, one is in a position to look at the visible form of bioinvasion that is taking place in deep seas, probably away from the land areas, and satellites can help you in identifying these locations and find remedies over that. The term invasion ecology, which has started getting into the circulation about a couple of decades ago, is also a very important area where not only the taxonomists from the field of biology, that is microbiology or zoology and botany, can play a role, but economists or even the social scientists, because people from different faculty can contribute to understanding of this particular subject. So it is not confined. Even the mechanical engineers, the marine engineers, for example, they can contribute. The marine architects, which are designing ships or related modes of transport. So these are some of the areas where it is a universal contribution from different strata of society, and all of you can play a very different role at your level, at the undergraduate level also, to understand the philosophy of this bioinvasion. And we are blessed with the two important ports of our country, and a small access through the letter from Honorable Principal can make you exposed to different field that you must have just got introduced now, and there is a huge interest that can be generated. And therefore, the improvement of technology in the 21st century can also play a very important role in making available new opportunities. In the post-COVID era, people are now wondering what could be the job opportunities for any graduate or a postgraduate degree holder. More than these degrees, which are also important, you should not allow yourself to enhance your ego because of the piece of paper which is called degree. But your skill sets that you would be able to enhance by way of utilizing your free time. If you are a commerce or arts graduate, then you can have the rest of the day in equipping yourself by way of learning different skills. And that is how this particular topic of biological invasion is very important and relevant with respect to the people like us who are staying in the coastal areas on an island city, which is a very important geopolitically important city, and also socially important for all of us because we are all surviving in a very tiny island and such a huge population. So these are some of the areas that I wanted to highlight. The Invasive ecology is rapidly becoming interlinked and interweaved with another disciplines, as I mentioned just now, such as conservation biology, restoration ecology, global change biology, and reintroduction ecology. Though the word ecology is common in that, every aspect of this ecological restoration or the understanding of global change, these are related to different specialized areas that you all come from and you can contribute in your own way. The new frameworks are required for integrating insights from disparate disciplines. For example, to integrate ecological perspectives with socio-economic considerations. So the better metrics are needed for quantification of impacts to allow for the objective prioritization of species for action and to facilitate the transfer of information between the regions. So what I'm trying to highlight here is that the pollution of the seas, the impact of this pollution, the sources that we have looked at, we are all aware about it, but this particular area is much more important and much more dangerous because we were not aware about it just about 3 decades ago. And now we are just trying to work on these technologies which can minimize the impact of this. So the human intervention is very much important, but the same interventions for our requirement for our own survival has led to transportation mechanisms, the commodities which are transported through waterways, and the new areas which are emerging out of this particular way. Among the many pressing questions for research associated with the repair of ecosystems following the removal of invasive species are those relating to legacy effects, secondary invasions, and predicting ecosystems responses to different forms of manipulation, possibilities for managing some invaded systems most effectively as novel ecosystems need careful consideration. Dear students, this particular presentation was prepared based on the research material that I have directly referred to and it forms the content of this particular presentation. These are some of the references which I have cited, and all this information you will find in the publication that are mentioned here. So it is not my original contribution in terms of taking photographs. They are all referred from this material, and I have given appropriate citations to that. What is important is that sharing of knowledge in a university like Mumbai, which we are all proud of. We have 827 colleges, more than 900,000 students, and more than 15,000 teachers. But the new education policy, which looks at providing opportunities to every strata of society, not necessarily socially deprived sections, but economically poor sections of the society, is also a very important aspect that we should all bear in mind. Because the pollution of mind is more dangerous than the pollution of the seas. And the pollution of minds takes place when you are trying to distinguish yourselves from your own friends, not in terms of surnames and caste and creed, but in terms of your ability to perform better than the other. And that competitive spirit has to be there. But you have to have a sharing of resources, sharing of knowledge, and continuity of your efforts, because at undergraduate level you are a large cohort. But out of all of you, if you consider 100% who are going to pass out undergraduate exams, only 7% out of you are going to get a chance to do post-graduation. I am talking about the national average, not the students of Sathe College as such. So 93% of all of you are going to be deprived of your further education only because you are born in a family where your parents may not be able to afford further education. economical. And therefore, the institutions which are at a stature of University Mumbai, we have greater hopes because these are the institutions which can provide that impetus to the people where economically deprived sections also can get opportunities. And therefore, you should understand one thing, the cooperation, collaboration and communication effectively will sail you through in your life. The education is going to give you better character, better ability to enhance your stature, to support yourselves, to stand on your own feet, as Swami Vivekananda had defined education in this manner. But you should also remember that you have a greater role to play for those who were not in a position to study at all because they were born in a different segment. You have certain commitment towards them, their enhancement. And in these kinds of lecture series, I'm sure the themes are Swaccha Sagar and Surakshit Sagar. But the saga of population, the Mahasagar that the Mumbai is experiencing because of its sheer population is also very important, and the pollution of that has to be prevented. And that is where the inculcation of qualities and the morals which are taught by the college like Sate College, one of the best colleges that we can think of Mumbai University. You should feel proud, you should carry forward this particular mission of the institution and make yourselves proud and make your teachers and parents very proud. That is how the nation will be proud of you. Thank you very much, sir, for this wonderful opportunity to talk to the students. Namaskar. Jai Hind.
Any questions? So we'll be very happy to answer your questions.
Yeah. Bola.
Can you give some remedies about that talk?
You're talking about Bioinvasion.
Yes.
Yeah. When this particular project we implemented in 2001 for 4 years, we were not only positioned to document the biological diversity of the oceans or the study areas and all the ports of our country. We were in a position to look at the types of ships which enter the port of call, their size, the kind of ballast water they carry. And since it was a global project, we were in a position to share our information with 6 nations which were covering the major ports of the world. And because of that, we were in a position to come out with certain formats which could be given to the ships before they enter the port of call. They should fulfill all those parameters, like documentation of how much ballast water they have filled in. While they are sailing, they should be testing that ballast water in-house, that is on the ship itself. They can develop their in-house small laboratory and they can find out which are the kind of major species which are there in that particular ballast water. So the data, when they are arriving at a particular nation's border, then that data can be transmitted to the port and the port can analyze, looking at their data, whether that ship has got certain invasive species which are going to be harmful to our country. So based on that, we should be in a position to take a remedy that whether the ship can be allowed to the port of call or whether you can send another ship and then exchange the commodities and bring your own ship back to your own port. So that was one major decision that was taken by the International Maritime Organization. और जैसा मैंने कहा कि अपने देश में सिर्फ मुंबई पोर्ट में 2 पोर्ट्स में 8,000-9,000 शिप्स आते हैं, तो अपने देश में कितने हजारों आते होंगे और ये 140-50 देश है जहाँ पे ये पोर्ट्स है, तो कितने लाखों शिप्स रोज आना जाना उनका होता हो, यातायात उसकी होती होगी। तो इसके लिए ये जो गाइडलाइंस थे ये बहुत मायने रखते हैं, बहुत अहम है, लेकिन ये कंटिन्यूअस प्रोसेस है। इसमें हम ऐसा नहीं कह सकते कि एक बार गाइडलाइंस हो गए तो हमारा पूरा काम हो गया, क्योंकि कई देश ऐसे हैं जिनको वो अफोर्ड नहीं कर सकते कि हमारी शिप्स को भेज के उनके हमारे कमोडिटीज को आप वापस ले आओ, क्योंकि उसमें जो आपका खर्चा होगा उससे वो कमोडिटीज अफोर्डेबल नहीं हो सकते। तो इसके लिए बायोलॉजिकल रिसर्च इन दिस हैज एनहांस्ड टू कंप्लीटली डिफरेंट लेवल। वी हैव अंडरस्टैंडिंग ऑफ व्हाट इज हैपनिंग ऑल ओवर द नेशन फॉर एवरी कंट्री। फॉर्चुनेटली we had in 1992 the World Biodiversity Congress, Convention on Biodiversity, CBD what we call it, in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, and about 134 nations signed the Biodiversity protocol at that time. And the agenda for 21st century was prepared at that time. So because of that initiative, now most of the nations are aware about what their biological resources are, to what level they are native, to what level they are invasive, to what level they are introduced. As I said, in the Green Revolution technologies, we introduced 2 or 3 varieties. But larger areas were brought under agriculture with those varieties because our requirement was feeding the nation. So from that point of view, our resources, its documentation, what we require, what needs to be done, whether we can have different designs of the ships. So all these things have started in the last 2 to 3 decades. And that is what is the success of this. And there are remedies, as I mentioned, they are already planned, the work is going on. And it has to evolve. It cannot be like you discard the old technology, but how will you replace with the new technology? It takes time to come out with new designs of the ships. So, and there are different types of transportation that takes place, like oil tankers or the container ships, or there are certain open material like ore which is just dumped onto the containers, open containers with just one lid, and that is transported to the waterways. So for each of these categories, the design can be or has to be different. And therefore the remedies, as you rightly asked, they are many, but all of them are being worked upon. And there is a solution in sight, but there are limitations also. Thank you.
But it can be too costly for the developing world also.
Yes, because it's ultimately developing world also has got equally good technology. The only problem is they are economically relatively poor. But the technology has reached all over the world because of the advancement of industrial revolution. So the technology is available, but the ability to transfer that technology into implementable format, the nations will have their own limitations based on their economical ability. So that is the only difference, but otherwise technology is available everywhere.
Thank you.
अजून कोणाला काही प्रश्न विचारायचे?
तुम्हाला वाचता आल्या ना स्लाइड्स? दिसत होतं ना व्यवस्थित अक्षर फॉन्ट साईज त्याप्रमाणे आपण ठेवतो ना की साधारण 50 फुटावर तुम्हाला वाचता येईल. So thank you very much for your patient hearing. I hope you have got something to take back and work on this idea. How you can put that into your workings and how do you enhance your abilities by going for different skill sets that you can accrue from your education.
साठे महाविद्यालय आणि विज्ञान प्रसार डिपार्टमेंट ऑफ सायन्स अँड टेक्नॉलॉजी मिनिस्ट्री ऑफ अर्थ सायन्स यांच्या संयुक्त विद्यमाने आज ही जी व्याख्यानमाला सुरू झालेली आहे त्याचा आज दुसरं लेक्चर आज आपल्या इथे साठे महाविद्यालयात आयोजित करण्यात आलं. आज आपल्याला जे व्याख्याते आज आपल्याला लाभलेले आहेत आपल्या मुंबई विद्यापीठाचे माजी कुलगुरू डॉक्टर संजय देशमुख सर. आज आम्ही खरंच खूप भाग्यवान आहोत की तुमच्यासारखे आज व्याख्याते आज आम्हाला लाभलेले आहेत आणि तुम्ही आमच्या विद्यार्थ्यांसमोर जो ज्ञानाचा खजिना उघड करून ठेवलेला आहे खरोखरच त्याचा खरंच आमच्या विद्यार्थ्यांना खूप फायदा होईल आणि पुढे ते जेव्हा भविष्यामध्ये जातील तेव्हा खरोखरच या ज्ञानाचा त्यांना खूप फायदा होईल आणि आम्ही तुमचे खूप आभार मानतो की तुम्ही आज वेळात वेळ काढून इथे आलात आमच्या विद्यार्थ्यांसाठी तुम्ही वेळ काढलात. सर, धन्यवाद सर. आजचं व्याख्यान इथेच संपलंय असं मी घोषित करतो. धन्यवाद.